We all think we know France through the Eiffel Tower. A warm baguette tucked under the arm, and a glass of wine at sunset. Yet, this ultimate sanctuary of romance is quietly killing off traditional weddings, replacing the sacred altar with a cold civil contract, where couples can divorce with a simple piece of mail. Welcome to France, a land of quiet luxury and fierce, pragmatic boundaries. This country operates on a set of unseen cultural rules that will force you to question everything you thought you knew. Let's begin. The art of looking effortless, and the one word that opens every door. Let's start with something you'll notice within 5 minutes of landing in Paris. Nobody is wearing sweatpants. Walk through any neighborhood, not the tourist traps, the actual residential streets, and you'll see it immediately. No leggings as day wear, no oversized hoodies, no athleisure doing double duty as real clothes. The French didn't get the memo that comfort is supposed to win. And that's not an accident. It's a philosophy. Parisians dress like they might run into someone important on the way to buy bread. Because in a sense, they might. A neutral-toned coat, a well-fitted trench, simple leather shoes, nothing flashy, nothing loud. The goal isn't to look like you tried hard. The goal is to look like you didn't have to. That's the paradox at the heart of French style. Enormous effort spent on appearing effortless. Americans call it quiet luxury now, like it's a new trend. In France, it's just Tuesday. And this shows up even more sharply with beauty standards, especially for women. If you've spent any time on American beauty content, you know the drill. Full coverage foundation, contour, highlight, a face that looks flawless in ring light photos. French beauty culture runs in almost the opposite direction. Ask a French woman about her routine and she won't talk about foundation shades. She'll talk about her skincare, cleansing, hydration, sun protection, sleep. The philosophy is that the face underneath the makeup should be the thing worth looking at, not the makeup itself. This isn't about looking effortless for effortless's sake either. It's cultural math. Skincare is a long-term investment. Makeup is a short-term mask. The French have quietly decided that mask wearing looks a little bit desperate, and skin maintenance looks like self-respect. So when you see a French woman with visible pores, a little redness, maybe a freckle she didn't cover, that's not neglect. That's often the point. But here's the rule that will actually get you in trouble if you break it. And it has nothing to do with clothes or skincare. It's one word: bonjour. In France, walking into a shop, a cafe, a pharmacy, even a small hotel lobby, and launching straight into your question, "Do you have this in a medium? Can I get a coffee?" without saying bonjour first, is not a small faux pas. It's read as genuinely rude, not a little abrupt, rude. And the door that was about to open for you, literally, figuratively, can slam shut on the spot. Why does one word carry that much weight? Because bonjour isn't functioning as small talk here, it's functioning as a boundary marker. It says, I see you as a person before I see you as a means to my end. I am entering your space, and I'm acknowledging that before I ask anything of you. Skip it, and you've just told the shopkeeper that you see them as a vending machine with a pulse. Don't be surprised when the vending machine stops working. This single habit is arguably the most useful piece of cultural knowledge you can carry into France. Say it walking into an elevator with a stranger. Say it walking into a doctor's waiting room. Say it before you ask the waiter anything. It costs nothing, and it buys you an enormous amount of goodwill, the kind that, without it, no amount of fluent French grammar can replace. So here's a question for you. Which country or state are you watching this from right now? Drop it in the comments. I'm always curious where this audience is scattered across the map. The contract that quietly replaced the wedding. Here's a statistic that surprises most Americans. In France, the traditional wedding, the big ceremony, the vows, the ring, the legal and religious ritual we think of as marriage, is in slow, steady decline. Fewer couples are doing it every year. And it's not because the French have given up on love. It's because they found something more efficient. It's called PACS, Pacte Civil de Solidarité, or Civil Solidarity Pact, and it has quietly become the default way French couples formalize their relationship. Introduced in 1999, PACS gives couples almost all the tax benefits, inheritance rights, and legal protections of marriage, but with none of the ceremonial baggage. You can set one up with a short administrative appointment, and if things don't work out, dissolving a PACS is just as simple. A signature, a filing, done. No lengthy divorce proceedings, no courtroom drama, no years of legal limbo. Think about what that says about how the French approach commitment. It's not that they take relationships less seriously. Statistically, PACS couples report similar levels of long-term stability to married couples. It's that they've stripped away the idea that a relationship needs a permanent, hard-to-exit legal structure in order to be real. The commitment lives in the relationship itself, not in the paperwork that's nearly impossible to undo. And this philosophy trickles down into something even more telling: children. In France today, the majority of children are born to couples who are living together, raising a family, fully committed to one another, and who have never had a wedding at all. Not eloped instead of a big wedding. Never married at all. To an outside observer, especially an American one, this can look almost radical. In the US, cultural and religious narratives still often tie family tightly to marriage. In France, the tie has loosened considerably. What matters is the emotional bond and the day-to-day responsibility of raising a child together, not whether a mayor or a priest ever formally signed off on the relationship. This is, in a strange way, deeply pragmatic. The French have a reputation for romance, but this is where you see the other side of the coin, an almost clinical unsentimentality about institutions. Love is real. Commitment is real. But the state's paperwork? That's just logistics, and logistics should be as simple as possible. It's worth knowing where PACS actually came from, because the origin story tells you something about how France solves problems. It wasn't originally designed for straight couples deciding marriage felt too heavy. It was created in 1999 largely as a response to the AIDS crisis, so that same-sex partners, who had no legal right to marry at the time, could gain hospital visitation rights, inheritance protections, and basic legal recognition as a household. France didn't get full marriage equality until 2013. Pax was the bridge that got built while the country argued about the bigger question. And once that bridge existed, heterosexual couples looked at it and thought, why take the harder road? Today, the overwhelming majority of Pax agreements are between opposite-sex partners. A law built for one purpose quietly rewrote the default for everyone. So here's a question worth sitting with. Is replacing the wedding altar with a civil contract a sign of a culture that has become less romantic, or one that has simply gotten more honest about what commitment actually requires? If you think this mindset is refreshingly practical, or if it strikes you as a little too detached, drop a number 4 in the comments. And get ready, because a genuinely strange food ritual is coming up next. A meal worth global recognition, and the tire company that invented food criticism. In 2010, UNESCO did something it had never done before. It added an entire country's meal, not a dish, not a recipe, the meal itself as a social ritual, to its list of humanity's intangible cultural heritage, the gastronomic meal of the French. That's worth pausing on. UNESCO wasn't honoring coq au vin or a particular cheese. It was honoring the structure, the ritual of sitting down together, moving through a sequence of courses, taking hours instead of minutes, treating the table as a place where relationships get built, not just where calories get consumed. In a world that increasingly eats standing up, scrolling a phone, alone, France got international recognition for stubbornly refusing to do that. Now, layer onto that the fact that France holds more Michelin-starred restaurants than almost any other country on Earth, and you'd assume the whole system was born from some deep, ancient culinary philosophy. It wasn't. It was a marketing scheme. Here's the origin story most people don't know. In 1900, France had fewer than 3,000 cars on its roads. The Michelin brothers, who made tires, had a problem. Nobody was driving far enough to wear out their tires and buy new ones. Their solution was the Michelin Guide, a free booklet listing good places to eat, sleep, and refuel gas along French roads. The logic was brutally simple. Give people a reason to drive further, and they'll wear out their tires faster. The world's most prestigious dining accolade started as a tire sales pitch. It wasn't until decades later that Michelin began sending anonymous inspectors to rate restaurants and introduced the star system that chefs now spend careers chasing, or, in some documented cases, have reportedly had breakdowns over losing. A rating system born to sell rubber somehow became the most feared judgment in the culinary world. And while we're correcting myths, let's kill a couple of the big ones about everyday French eating. No, the average French person is not eating a buttery croissant every single morning. That's a tourist fantasy. The actual daily habit is far more modest. A piece of baguette with butter or jam, maybe dipped in coffee. Croissants are more of a weekend treat than a daily ritual. And the wine consumption you picture, a glass with every single dinner, a nation perpetually a little tipsy, has actually dropped sharply compared to a few decades ago. Younger French people are drinking noticeably less wine than their grandparents did. The stereotype hasn't caught up with the data. There's another myth worth unpacking here too, the idea of one unified French food. Ask someone from Brittany what a proper meal looks like, and they'll point you toward buckwheat crepes and fresh oysters. Ask someone from Provence, and the answer shifts to olive oil, tomatoes, and herbes de Provence. Head to Lyon, widely considered the country's true culinary capital, and you'll find hearty, meat-forward bistro cooking that has almost nothing in common with the delicate plates people picture when they think French cuisine. The country is roughly the size of Texas, yet its food culture splits into dozens of fiercely defended regional identities. What hasn't changed is the underlying philosophy. Food isn't fuel, it's a container for time spent with other people. That part, UNESCO got right. The quiet rebellion against convenience. Here's something that will genuinely confuse an American visitor. In France, tipping is not the anxious, mental math ritual it is back home. And it's not because French service is worse, it's often the opposite. In the US, servers are frequently paid a sub-minimum wage and rely on tips to make rent, which creates a kind of performed enthusiasm, the extra attentive check-ins, the just wanted to make sure everything is perfect, energy that's really about the tip at the end. In France, servers are salaried, unionized in many cases, and treated as skilled professionals with actual job security. They don't need to perform gratitude to survive, so they don't. What you get instead is competent, professional, slightly reserved service, someone doing their job well because it's their job, not because your generosity depends on their smile. A small tip for excellent service is appreciated, but it's a bonus, not a lifeline. That same resistance to convenience at all costs shows up somewhere even more surprising: grocery shopping. Most Americans do one big supermarket run a week, maybe stock up at a warehouse club, and try to minimize trips. Many French households do the opposite on purpose. It's common to shop 3 or 4 separate times a week: the boulangerie for bread, the market for produce, a specialty butcher or cheesemonger for the rest, rather than doing it all under one fluorescent-lit roof. It sounds on paper like more work. From the French perspective, it's the opposite of a chore. It's a series of small social interactions, a relationship with the person who sells you your cheese, a reason to walk through the neighborhood multiple times a week instead of driving to a big box store and speaking to no one. Underneath both of these habits, the unhurried service, the multiple small shopping trips, is a single value. The French have made a cultural decision that time and connection are worth more than raw efficiency. This is the concept of savoir-vivre, loosely, knowing how to live. It shows up in the 2-hour lunch that's still common in smaller towns, the afternoon spent reading in a park with genuinely nothing else on the agenda, the refusal to treat eating as something you squeeze between tasks. It's easy to romanticize this from the outside. It's also, statistically, a little inefficient by American productivity standards. But that might be exactly the point. The French aren't optimizing for output, they're optimizing for a life that doesn't feel like it's constantly being optimized. Beautiful buildings, brutal living conditions. Paris is one of the most photographed cities on Earth, and almost every iconic shot, the long, uniform boulevards, the cream-colored stone facades, the wrought iron balconies, traces back to one man, Baron Haussmann, who redesigned the city in the mid-1800s under Napoleon III. The result was a level of architectural uniformity most cities never achieve, and it's protected by law. Building facades in central Paris must be maintained to preserve that visual harmony, which is why the city still looks so consistently elegant more than 150 years later. What that same law doesn't fix is what's inside those beautiful buildings, and this is where the postcard cracks a little. Many of those charming, centuries-old one-bedroom apartments are, by modern standards, tiny. Genuinely tiny. Low ceilings in the upper maids' quarters floors, minimal storage, bathrooms that were clearly retrofitted into spaces never designed to hold plumbing. And then there's the elevators, when a building even has one. Many are so narrow they were built to fit a suitcase, not a person. It's a real well-known Parisian ritual. You send your luggage up in the elevator alone, and you take the stairs to meet it on your floor. Then there's the heat problem, and this one has gotten dramatically worse. In the summer of 2026, France experienced a brutal heat wave, with temperatures across parts of Europe spiking to a record-breaking 44.3 degrees Celsius, well above 110 degrees Fahrenheit. And here's what surprises most Americans. Most French homes still don't have air conditioning. This isn't purely stubbornness, though there's an element of that too. Central Paris's historic buildings are protected by strict preservation codes. You can't just bolt an external AC unit onto a 19th century stone facade without a fight from the preservation board. There's also a genuine environmental argument. AC is energy intensive, and France has built its entire national identity around energy efficiency and reducing consumption. So instead of refrigerated air, French households lean on centuries-old passive cooling, thick stone walls that hold their temperature, and firmly shut wooden shutters at midday to block direct sun, opened again once the evening cools things down. It's a system that worked for hundreds of years of milder summers. Whether it can keep working as heat waves like 2026's become more frequent is an open question, and one more and more French people are starting to ask out loud. The fortress instinct. From medieval castles to nuclear power, France has a defensive streak that runs remarkably deep, and once you notice it, you start seeing it everywhere. Start in the Loire Valley, where more than 40,000 castles and fortified estates are scattered across the countryside. An almost absurd concentration of medieval and Renaissance architecture built, originally, for one purpose: defense and self-sufficiency. Noble families building their own walled worlds, capable of surviving sieges and outlasting rivals. That instinct, build it yourself, protect it fiercely, don't depend on anyone else for your survival, didn't disappear with the castles. It just changed shape. Fast forward to 1973. The global oil crisis hits, and France, which imported the overwhelming majority of its energy, gets a brutal wake-up call about what it means to be dependent on other countries for something as basic as electricity. The response was a national plan so ambitious it's still shaping the country's power grid today. The Mesmer Plan, a full-scale pivot to nuclear energy. The numbers now are staggering. As of 2026, France operates 56 nuclear reactors, and nuclear power supplies roughly 70% of the country's entire electricity output, by far the highest percentage of any major nation on Earth. While much of Europe scrambled during recent energy crises, France largely didn't, because it had spent 50 years building the modern equivalent of those Loire Valley fortresses: energy self-sufficiency as a form of national defense. That same engineering ambition shows up on the rails. France's TGV high-speed trains have long been a symbol of infrastructure done right, and 2026 marks the rollout of the next generation, the TGV-M. It's built to run at speeds up to 320 kilometers per hour, roughly 200 miles per hour, while using about 20% less energy than previous generations, and it does that while actually increasing passenger capacity. It's a small, precise engineering flex. More people, moved faster, using less power. The fortress mentality, translated into steel and electricity. From castle walls to reactor cores, the through line is the same. Control your own resources, and you control your own future. The right to complain, the law against your boss, and a summer of football fever. Americans often see French protests on the news and read them as instability, as a country in constant crisis. That's a fundamental misread. In France, complaining, and organized protest specifically, isn't a symptom of a broken system, it's a working part of the system. The French have a well-earned reputation for grumbling, and it comes from a very specific cultural instinct. They know exactly what fairness is supposed to look like, and they're not shy about saying when reality falls short. Protest in France functions almost like a formal negotiating tool between citizens and the state, organized, expected, and historically effective. It's how the country has defended things most workers elsewhere have lost entirely, like the 35-hour standard work week, a benchmark that remains one of the shortest in the developed world. And that same instinct, protecting personal time as a near-sacred boundary, produced one of France's most quietly radical laws, the right to disconnect. Passed into law, this legislation gives employees a genuine legal shield against being penalized for not answering work emails or calls outside of business hours. Not a company policy that HR can quietly ignore. A law. If your boss in France pressures you to respond to a 9 p.m. email and then holds it against you for not replying, they are the one on the wrong side of the legal line, not you. Compare that to the American always-on, check your phone in bed default, and the gap in national philosophy becomes obvious. France has decided your evening legally belongs to you. And in the summer of 2026, that same national character showed up somewhere completely different: football. The 2026 World Cup swept through French society with the kind of unifying force that briefly makes every other divide feel small. Behind captain Kylian Mbappé, France pushed through the group stage with commanding wins over Sweden and Paraguay, and the entire country's mood visibly lifted with every match. Cafes spilled into the streets, strangers hugged over goals, national pride surged in a way that, for a few weeks, cut cleanly across every generational and political line, right as the team pushed on toward the knockout rounds. It's a reminder that a country built on complaint and boundary setting is also, underneath it, deeply capable of collective joy. The French just don't hand that joy out for free. Hunting for old things, paying more for the Louvre, and finding France away from the crowds. There's a specific French obsession that doesn't get talked about enough: Brocante culture. The sprawling flea markets and secondhand fairs where entire weekends get spent digging through other people's old furniture, chipped ceramics, tarnished mirrors, and mismatched cutlery. This isn't just thrifting for a bargain. It's closer to a value system. French homes, especially outside the ultra-modern apartments, often blend genuinely old pieces with new ones, a grandmother's chair next to a contemporary sofa, because there's real prestige in owning something with history stitched into it. In a culture that already resists disposable convenience in its groceries and its relationships, it tracks that they'd resist it in their furniture too. A Brocante find isn't just decor. It's a small act of sustainability wrapped in nostalgia. Speaking of history under pressure, 2026 brought a genuinely contentious change to one of France's most visited landmarks. The Louvre raised its ticket price to €37, specifically for international visitors from outside the EU, a move explicitly designed to push back against over-tourism and ease the strain on a museum that was, frankly, buckling under its own popularity. The reasoning from French officials was blunt. The Louvre is a piece of French heritage maintained substantially by French taxpayers, and unlimited cheap access for the entire planet was starting to damage the very thing everyone was flying in to see. It's a small but telling example of the same instinct we saw with the castles and the nuclear reactors. Protect what's yours, even if it upsets outsiders. So if you're planning an actual trip, here's the real advice, not the postcard version. Skip the crowd crushing itself at the base of the Eiffel Tower and go find the France that isn't performing for tourists. Wander Montmartre, past the obvious viewpoints, into the quieter Martyrs neighborhood, where the cafes are full of actual Parisians instead of selfie sticks. And if you can get out of the city entirely, take an actual road trip. The medieval villages and lavender fields of Provence will teach you more about this country in one afternoon than a week in central Paris ever could. The France worth seeing was never really about the landmarks. It's about the version of the country that isn't trying to sell you anything. The French concept of l'art de vivre, the art of living, isn't the absence of modern problems. It's a clear-eyed, almost stubborn decision to live well anyway, in spite of every contradiction the world throws at it. While modern life pressures all of us towards speed, eat fast, move fast, hand over every waking hour to work, France chose to slow down instead. They turned a shared meal into recognized world heritage. They turned disconnecting from your inbox into actual law. They treat simple, unadorned beauty as basic self-respect, not an afterthought. France remains the single most visited country on Earth, and it's not because everything there is perfect. It's because it dared to define its own way of living, and then refused, again and again, to apologize for it.